your leaders are sitting and listening to everyone talk very much from the heart because they're usually talking about something that they've built from in here, but it's out here. So it's easier to talk about. So the leaders are listening to that. They get equal time. They get to hear perspectives and perceptions that they would never have heard before. They have a deeper understanding. And the staff get to hear as well that their leader is human.
Electricast. Welcome to Season 4 of Transforming 45. I'm your host, Lisa Boat, and this season we're stepping fully into our power. The heat, the hormones, the heartbreak, the healing. This is midlife, raw and redefined. Each episode, you'll hear stories of humans who are rewriting the rules, reclaiming their bodies, their desires, their voices. This is where we stop shrinking, start shining, and remember who the hell we are. Because midlife isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. Let's get transforming 45. Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am with Theresa Bailey. She trains adults with Play-Doh. And before you write that off as fluffy, stay with me because what she's doing is actually disrupting how we think about leadership, communication, and burnout at work. As the founder of Starfish, Synergies, North America's exclusive partner for Play-Doh Power Solutions, Theresa helps teams get out of their heads and into honest human conversations that actually change how work feels, and do we ever need to do that? She's a best-selling author, recognized export leader, and someone who's built a career proving that the way we've been doing leadership isn't working, and today we're getting into why. This is such a timely conversation, Theresa. I am so glad you're here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's get into it. Theresa, why Play-Doh? And why does it work on adults who think that they are too serious for it?
Well, I think that if we want to talk about why it works on adults, we have to talk about how our brain works. And that goes back to how much of our brain are we actually using and how have we been programmed over time to use our brain. So the right side of the brain operates the left side of our body. The left side of our brain operates the right side of our body. The left brain is very logical. The right brain is relationship based. And for the last 100 many years through the Industrial Revolution, we've been focused on using that left logical side of our brain. And then when that no longer works, which we saw a few years ago, we have to start using the other side of our brain. The best way to do that is to use our hands. We're accessing both sides. We're taking ourselves back to childhood. And it's important for people who are stuck with the same way of thinking, disrupts us completely into having completely different conversations.
Yeah. And it's like the left brain, right brain is such a great way to conceptualize the different elements of ourselves. And we know now the brain is so integrated. This allows us to use our brains in ways that we just haven't before. So, like you said, we get so wrapped up in the thinking brain. And I was having a conversation with a therapist who was on the show yesterday, and we talked about this as well. But so much of what we are managing at this juncture in time is deeply emotional and connected to identity, and we can't think our way out of feeling problems. So, how do you help leaders in particular who have been trained in a very specific way understand that to really create workplaces that function well, we have to look at the whole humanity of the people who are in those workplaces?
Well, there are people who are very proactive about it, who already know this stuff. And then there are people who come to me who are really struggling with the team. So they're like finally willing to try something new that they probably should have been working on before. So everything they've been trying hasn't worked. They've been working with their team, for example, for years. There are a couple of people who are struggling to get along. They don't know what to do. So, okay, we need to think differently now. So maybe you can help us. And absolutely, that's what happens. So it's completely disarming when people walk into a room and they see a pyramid of Play-Doh. Usually they don't know that's going to happen. And they're like, what is happening? Then they're sort of like, oh. But then as soon as they crack the lid and it takes them right back to, like, people will say things like, "It feels like Christmas. It smells like childhood." And so already you're out of that thinking that cycle that you'd typically get yourself into.
Yeah, just seeing the Play-Doh stacked behind you, I can smell it.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah, the smell of Play-Doh is so distinct, and it helps us get into our sensory bodies, right? We don't think about that when we're at work, right? We kind of take the body and put it on the shelf when we're at work, which we now know is really detrimental. So can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of burnout and how that has been directly connected to the ways we've been ignoring the body and how the Play-Doh helps people come back into their bodies again?
Absolutely. I think it's especially relevant because it's people my age who are at a certain point in our careers or our lives who are hitting that point. I had someone say to me just yesterday, I have taken about 2 days off in my entire life. This is someone who's worked 26 years in social services sector. I see so many of my colleagues who are having to leave, and I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to keep showing up, but I honestly feel like I am as close to burnout as I've ever been. That is a typical story that I'm hearing right now. So, of course, similar to the teams that I just told you about, they're struggling, wanting to come back together. It helps people come back to their body because we engage different senses. So we already talked about the smell. Now you're using touch. We use music, so you're using sound. And all of the senses start to be engaged. One of the things I wish that everybody knew earlier that I learned in university, but I wish everybody knew it, the more ways and the more senses you use to learn information, the easier it is to retrieve it. So you're embedding it in a number of different ways, and then it's easier to access it. But by also using different senses, it's easier to engage different parts of the brain. So by people being present, by people using all different types of their senses, they're able to activate parts of their brain or thinking they probably haven't used before. And they are in the moment doing something instead of spiraling, ruminating in ways that they probably have been doing for the last 2 years.
Yeah. How do you think workplaces would change if we were proactive about this? If instead of waiting for challenge to show up or difficulty in teams to show up, that when you are forming a team or when new people come into a team, we took some intentional time to set cultural expectation for how we're going to work together. How do you think that workplace would change if we started that way rather than waiting for there to be a problem?
Well, sometimes we get caught up in there's too much to do. I can't worry about that. It's not time for that now. But the way a lot of our workplaces are structured, don't this isn't a metric they're counting. It's not like if you're a not-for-profit with ministry funding, they have a checkbox or a metric that you can check of, are you looking after your team? Right? Like, they
Yeah.
don't. So, it's, how many clients are you seeing? How many interactions? How many outcomes? It's all outcome-based, but it's outcome-based more for clients than it is for people who are working. So that because so many people are focused on the sustainability of their organization financially, they aren't thinking about what it actually requires of their staff, and I don't think we're set up for it that way. I think corporate teams often are potentially better at that, potentially, not all of them, where not-for-profits are the ones who are really struggling because they're dealing with some of the toughest challenges right now.
What are the leadership moves that aren't working? Because I think it's really connected to what you were just talking about, that we don't have a metric for how are we looking after our teams? How are we looking after our people? That really struck me. That is sticking with me and is directly connected to leadership, right? And what we have been instructed, programmed to believe leadership looks like. So what are the leadership structures that we have inherited into work that now looks very different that are just not working.
Yeah, that's one of those. I think that a lot of people, there are still women in leadership who I want to be delicate a little bit about this, but no, I'll just say it, who are embody a lot of the characteristics that we feel like have to be seen by men or shown
Yes.
in men, the authoritative, the power and the, directive and listen to me. But that's not necessarily where their skills lie. And that's not necessarily what their staff needs. So that very hierarchical structure, no question, I'm the boss, doesn't work. It still does exist. But also, sometimes there are one or two people in an organization who seem to make all the decisions and are very close, and then everyone else is othered. Uh, that doesn't work either. I know there has to be a balance, and there's such a challenge when you're dealing with the lives of all of the staff and trying to accommodate people all the time, those hierarchical structures, those othering of your team. And I really can tell, I really like when the leaders participate with their staff so they hear what's going on with them. And sometimes you will see them say, I want you to come in and work with my staff. I'll try to pop in. That doesn't work.
It doesn't work. I'm actually really, really glad that you highlighted that. So I also I'm going to come back to this, but I wanted to go back to the women in leadership. And I just wanted to add, because I think it's really important that it's like what you were saying is not about blame or about stereotype. It is about internalized misogyny. And it's the way I started thinking about it was these women, it's their armor. They are putting that on because the expectations that have been placed on them are so external to who they really are. Because in education, I watched this happen over and over and over again. Really brilliant women who I deeply respected, when they got into positions of power, I no longer recognized them. And it made me really angry for a long time. I was disappointed in them. I was angry at them until I realized what it must be like for them to be in these positions where there are having to do things that I know is counter to what they actually would want to do or counter to how they actually would want to lead. And yet they carry the burden of, if I fail, I am failing not just for myself, I'm failing for women in
Uh-huh.
general.
Uh-huh.
And so holding that level of pressure and expectation leads people into making choices that they might not otherwise make.
I think that's a valid and astute observation. I'm going to give an example of one person in particular. So, at one point, a colleague and I were putting together this leadership series for leaders. We were trying to get people together. It was at the height of burnout. Actually, three of those people have since left. So, we were doing a whole bunch of things. We're saying, hey, do you want to start a network? One of the women was really not kind, and she kept like, she would be very blunt. And then she would say, if a man was this blunt, no one would care. And I was thinking, if a man was this blunt, I would say something in a way very different to the way I'm talking with you. I would address it very differently. But at the end of it all, she was one of the people who said, I don't need this. I don't need this resilient stuff. I don't need this. My staff might need it. I don't need it. And I'm thinking, we've had 2 sessions. You have cried both of those sessions, and you just had a heart attack, and we're off for a year. So you actually do need it more than anybody here. And I think exactly after all of that happened, I think I had that exact observation about her, is that she has felt she's had to act this way. It does not fit with her. And it has resulted in all of these health things. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the telltale sentences to me. I don't need this. If someone says to me, I don't need this, I know that they do. And it just is it's too revealing. It's too much of a mirror when you're talking about like a woman, she said, if a man were this blunt, no one would say anything. I was like, that's a perfect example of the armor. Right. That's the armor that we put on to protect ourselves in these spaces where we don't feel safe. Which is exactly why participating with your team and being fully present and engaged in what your team is doing is so important. So, can you talk a little bit about what you see happens when leaders actually participate with their team?
Absolutely. The most fascinating part of it for me every time is that I'm told that a couple people might not engage. They're very quiet, they might not engage. They're usually the ones with the most to say. And the leaders don't get any more airtime than anyone else just on the way that we run it. So, by the way that we roll out our sessions. So, what that means is that your leaders are sitting and listening to everyone talk very much from the heart because they're usually talking about something that they've built from in here, but it's out here. So it's easier to talk about. So the leaders are listening to that. They get equal time. They get to hear perspectives and perceptions that they would never have heard before. They have a deeper understanding. And the staff get to hear as well that their leader is human. So there's this development of empathy that happens in a way that I haven't seen happen quite the same in other situations or other structures. It At the end, we are okay, we've identified these things. Now what are we going to do about it? And we make those decisions together. So by we, I mean they. I'm guiding the conversation. But then we have an action plan for some of the issues that just came up. That would not have if the team comes up with the solutions without the leader there, they don't understand where it came from. And it's easier to say, no, they were just part of the solution building. And now because they've taken one example would be a team I worked with. They've had a lack of privacy. They had felt a lack of privacy in the place where they were working because they had people always walking by looking in the windows. When that conversation took place with the staff and the leaders there and understanding of shifts and what was happening at night, they decided to get custom curtains and blinds. That is such a minor thing. That was not a huge change, but that small amount of being heard and implemented right away was the founding, like the base for rebuilding trust.
Yes. And I think it's important that you highlight that it can be very what seem like small actions, but because they are actually grounded in caretaking, right? In showing that you actually value the voice of the people that you work for. I had the privilege of working on a team that was incredibly highly functioning. It was led by a superintendent who was the most heart led leader I have ever had the privilege of working for. And so all the decisions she made came from what is going to actually fill up the people who are doing this work. That was her baseline. And so every decision that was made came from that place. And one of the small examples that's very concrete like that one was she changed our workspace so that instead of us all being in our own like little sections of cubicles, yes, we had our own individual spaces, but it was around a great big table
Right.
that was in the center so that we could, and for the majority of the time, we all worked around this one big table so that we could collaborate with each other. If we were researching something, turn to someone. One of my favorite things was we were all doing very disparate things, right? So at the time, I was supporting math instruction in elementary, but beside me was someone who was supporting science instruction in secondary. And I could turn to that person and say, like, how would this play out in your context, in your situation? So we were able to have these really like diverse, rich conversations. And when that leader left, the person who came in next went no to all of this. Just completely got rid of the big table, put everybody back into their individual containers, I'm going to call them. And the culture of that team shifted immediately.
What was their reason for getting why did they not like the table? Did they think it was not as efficient and effective? Because I think that's some people just have a way of working. I'm always curious why.
I think it was a power move in one to say, uh, this is how I do things, and this is how it's going to be from now on. So it was that. The other piece that I think is a little more complex is that I think work didn't look like what this person expected work to look like. We were so happy. We,
Think about that statement. Didn't look like what it was supposed to look like because we were so happy.
yeah, yes, we were really engaged. We were really committed, but it didn't look like what a traditional workplace would look like. And I think that that was unacceptable to the person who came in and took over.
So when you ask things that don't work in leadership, it's when people come in and make a ton of changes without understanding. I am not saying that changes don't sometimes need to be made. I'm not saying that, but they don't just need to be made for the sake of being made. And that happens often. And then what I've seen a lot is that it's like a boomerang. They end up re-implementing it once the person understands why it was happening. So that's very common.
So let's talk specifically about what's happening with women in particular in midlife. So we know the factors now that are starting to come into play, right? Perimenopause, menopause are having an impact on confidence, on some of the things that I experience myself and hear the most are like brain fog, word recall issues. Everything that worked suddenly doesn't work anymore. And so, how can some of your practices in building these team cultures help to support women who maybe are on the cusp of leaving? Because we know 1 in 10 women are leaving the workforce because of unsupported menopause and perimenopause symptoms. So, what are some of the things that need to shift and change so that people who are in this position of being really valuable to their organization, but feeling like, I don't know if I can keep doing this job?
Yeah, and that is a real thing that I am seeing. There is such an exodus of women who have this culture, this history of the culture of an organization, and all this depth of knowledge are suddenly gone. And the people who are left are trying to bridge the gap between newer staff who have brand new, don't understand the history, and the few people who are left who are now exhausted. I think that the work that we do really tries to bridge the gaps or misalignment or misunderstandings across generations so that different work styles or communication styles can be better understood. I have great empathy for people who are on the older end of the workforce. I looked around and realized I was the oldest person in the room recently, which, you kind of were like, I used to be the youngest person in the room.
Yeah, how did this happen? Yeah.
That's happened. Oh, that's happened. But I had a conversation. So here is a conversation that happened with a group that I was working with. I have younger people, probably mid-20s, working with people who've been in the field for 30 plus years, are tired, and have this wealth of knowledge, but also decreased patience or willingness they were in healthcare, so they just wanted to do their jobs and get them done. Didn't have an understanding of how a lot of the younger staff who didn't have the experience that they had to make very quick decisions about things that they'd seen a million times. And so it was really important to bridge the gap between those two groups of people working in the same place so that they understood that they both had strengths. Some of the younger staff had a lot more room for empathy and compassion to deal with more difficult clients. Some of the older staff had a lot more wisdom in how to deal with things quickly. You can benefit and work together on around those things. What you can't do is think that your way is right all the time. And so I think to answer your question, I think it's really conversations about where can we use each other's strengths, having understanding about where people are in their lives. We never talked about this stuff about menopause and perimenopause. Maybe educating some of the younger people about things they're going to be going through will help them to be more empathetic to what people are going through and be able to lean on them in different ways also. So those are the kinds of conversations we end up having that were not happening 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's really important. And what you said around what you have to do is realize that your way isn't right. And I think in so many work cultures of organizations, the people who are coming into them were trained in specific ways. And so, of course, they think, well, yeah, my way is the right way.
Mhm.
So, what are some of the techniques that you use or strategies to break that down and to be able to see that cross generational value?
Well, we have a whole series of different types of workshops that we do. So the team building that is founded on the 5 components of effective teams, which is Project Aristotle, which is out of Google. So really, we really spend time focusing on psychological safety, what it means to work at a place where you can do your best, you can try your best without fear of being ridiculed or punished for trying. And having those open discussions around that is really important. But when it comes to the communication part, some of the activities we do, one is I start reading a set of instructions. People aren't allowed to talk to each other or look at each other. And then we see what happens at the end, right? And because every team comes to me saying, we need to communicate better. Okay, what does that mean? More emails? Like you want more emails? You want more meetings? Is that what you want? So we really start to break that down. And through having those conversations, talking about the types of noise that come up, which is physical noise, psychological noise, biases, physiological noise, how are you feeling, which relates to the menopause and perimenopause symptoms, and then semantic noise. Were we trained in different language? That happens constantly, right? Constantly it happens. Something that and especially in education, my lord, you
Yeah.
right? Like there are completely education will take a concept and because I've worked in it and tweak it slightly so that it's their own. So now if you're having the same conversation with an outside agency, you're using the same acronym in two completely different ways. So those are really important conversations that you can have that start to break down the gaps across generations, but you're doing it in a really non-threatening way where you're all learning about each other.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where it really hasn't worked, right? Where the strategies and the session sort of fell apart?
I wouldn't say that there was a time when it fell apart. I mean, probably about 15 years ago, I was not using Play-Doh, I was using other methods. And I realized that they expected to solve every problem in one meeting. That does not work. It's like you can't come in, or I was just asked to go in and work with they're a high functioning team who are having a lot of problems. 2 hours. We need to get through all this stuff in 2 hour workshop is like for anyone who does this it is the worst. I would rather have 1 hour and do some gimmicky, like this is what we can do than a 2 hour workshop. It's tough. So when people try to do too much in a one off, those are the times when you're like, this worked, but there are some follow up steps you have to do if you actually want to change your culture. It can't be done in 2 hours.
Yes. And this is what's so important. And I think it is that expectate the work of there has to be pre work and there has to be post work, right? The coming in and doing a one off will have impact in the moment, but for it to actually take root requires time and it requires specific coming back to what that learning was. So, what do you see the flow looking like when it is working at its best? Like, what expectations need to be set? What does the pre work need to look like? And what does the post work need to look like?
That's a great question. That's really our work is trying to figure out exactly that. The pre-work is actually really important and having discussions about what do you actually want to accomplish at the end of this session? What is it that you want to have changed? What do you want people to feel? What are the 3 things that you would consider a success? We have those conversations so then we can structure the hopefully day or 2 days around it and make sure we keep weaving those conversations into the talk. When people say, "Yeah, come in for 2 hours, um, and talk about communication," and you're saying, "Okay, but what?" And, "Yeah, that'll be fine." That's really tough. If you are able to do the pre-work, weave it through the day, and the end of the day ends up being that planning or that, okay, this is what we're going to do next session, and then be able to come back to it. So the best work I think that I've been able to do is with people who either have me a couple days in a row to go through a whole bunch of stuff and then we check in over time to see how things are, or schedule like 5 days or half days, whatever it is, once a month where you might have a session. Then we'll check in 2 weeks to see how it's going. We'll put what we talked about in action. Then we come back in 2 weeks later, have an in-person session or online, take on another topic, figure out what we're going to do, put that into practice. Those seem to work better because, again, you're embedding things in different ways and you're making sure that people are able to implement the learning and the things that you said you were going to do.
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight that because although we are talking about organizations and cultures, the same is true at the individual level. Yeah. So, it's one of the things that I struggle with my own work is that if someone comes to see me for a one-off session, and sure there'll be things that you take away, and it also requires time and attention to the self and what's really happening, right? The pre-work is the like, what is actually happening with me? What am I noticing? What's coming up for me right now? Doing the learning. And then the implementation phase, whether or be it organization or individual, is often where things fall off, right? Because people don't take the time to actually do the work of implementation. And so, where do you see cultures that really take the time to do that work? How do they shift and change?
Well, I think one of the things that happens is that satisfaction with where they're working and the relationships where they are goes up. There is a decrease in turnover of staff, so people stick around. They're able to recruit better staff because one of the things that happens is when you're looking for a place, especially in not-for-profit, not people know people who work there. So you ask what the culture's like. Oh, it's great. We do this and this, and that is a huge deterrent if they're not doing that work. So when teams are able to put these things in place, they're more engaged. They are more comfortable talking about difficult things. We kind of set up, we talk about intentions a lot. What are your intentions for this meeting? What are your intentions for this conversation? If you learn to think about what your intentions are, someone else has positive intentions for you, you start working in that culture, you can have a lot more difficult conversations that get to the crux of a lot of the things going wrong. So people are able to resolve some of those age-old issues faster, and they're able to work together for more positive change for themselves and also for whoever they're supporting or whatever their work or their mission is within their company or organization.
Yeah. So, what is one leadership move that someone could take tomorrow that would start to shift and impact their team or their culture?
Well, actually, I think that intention piece um, really important and really easy to implement. So at the start of every meeting, I will say, okay, these are objectives. We're trying to get through this today, but this is my intention. My intention is the heart that I'm bringing to today or how I want us to feel at the end of it. And my intentions are, and I will usually, depending on what the day set up, it's usually something like, I want to give you a safe space to have difficult conversations. I want to make sure this is a great place for everybody to work, and I want you to have fun. So I want you to think about what are your intentions for this meeting for yourself and for the team. And if we all think about that for 2 minutes, people talk about it, and then does anyone have bad intentions? No? Okay. So the conversations we're about to have are with good intentions. It's so simple and it might sound too simplistic, but I am telling you it changes how people show up having conversations. Because if you call people, sometimes people do have bad intentions. Some people are there to make sure that so and so gets thrown under the bus for X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But, right? Like if you kind of remove that from the table, it really changes things.
Yeah. And it brings all those things to light. And I think this kind of brings us back to the beginning of the conversation as well, because when we're thinking about our intentions and our actions, it brings us back to the body. Right? It brings because you have to pay attention to who am I in this space? How am I showing up in this space? What do I really want to have happen? And so you have to be connected to yourself in order to really do that.
I agree. And I had that thought this morning before I joined you. as I ate my chia seeds, why am I doing this? Because I know it's good for my body.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this right now, but I'm going to do it.
Funny. I was having the same sort of back and forth with myself because I generally eat the same thing every single day for breakfast. Like my routine is very consistent, and I was having the same conversation with myself of like, why is it that I do this? I'm like, yeah, because I know that I feel good after.
That's right.
And yeah, my specific battle this morning was my workout. Like I I
Yeah.
Yeah. I like to take some time with my tea in the morning, which meant I
Yeah.
didn't have enough time. So I actually, while I look a little professional on top, it's all workout gear underneath because I was like, this was the compromise I made. I will throw this on. And then when I'm done recording this morning, I will go and I will do my workout. But being connected to like, what is our intention, right?
Yeah.
And the intention is I'm going to take care of myself. And
Yeah.
when I am feeling good and I'm taking care of myself, I have capacity to take better care of the people who are in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even one of those conversations I have with, especially with women who are working hard, your productivity goes up 20% if you take a half-hour walk during the day. There are studies that show that. Everyone's too busy to do it. If your intention is to actually work hard, you need to feel good in your body. It helps your brain, it helps your body. So take that time, go do what you need to do for yourself, and then you'll be better for everybody else, exactly as you just said.
It's so key. And it makes me think about what we really value because I have this sentence rolling around in my head that somebody said to me recently. And it was about taking care of themselves. And they were considering like, should I take a leave? And the person said, it's just not in my DNA. Yeah. And my heart broke for the person at that moment and everybody in the room agrees, right? And when we think about what do we think about those people who do actually take time for themselves, who do go for the walk, who do take time to eat lunch, who do take a leave if they need to. There's a lot of judgment in that
There
often.
is. Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There can be. Some of the people I admire most, though, who are most efficient and most effective, are definitely eating healthy, active, and sometimes I just think that's too much of a commitment, right? But I know that I'm at my best when I do all those things. So I do agree there is a judgment around it that we have to really try to break that down.
Yes. And I think that that's one of the most important things we can do is to really start shifting towards our intention is to feel good so we can do what we need to do. And that changes, that means it changes what we value, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom with us. I just wanted to finish up with this conversation is such a powerful reminder that transformation doesn't actually come from pushing harder. It comes from doing things differently. And whether we're talking about leadership, menopause, identity, or the workplace, the systems aren't broken because people are failing. They're broken because they were never designed for the full human experience. So I want to leave everybody with this question to think about today. What would change if we started building systems that actually work for the people inside them? Theresa, thank you for your time today. All of your contact information will be in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. Theresa is available to come and work with you and your organizations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for hanging out with me on Transforming 45. If you laughed, nodded, or had an oh wow moment, hit follow and share it with your favorite midlife human. Find me on Instagram at @lboat and keep those transformations coming.
Electric acid.